I feel like my local Chinese place is throwing shade at me.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. I did a big order the other day, and then they were like, how much rice do you need? I was like, I need it for 2 people. So then when I got the order, there were like 8 sets of chopsticks and 8 fortune cookies in there.
Okay.
Which I feel like is a judgment about the amount of food that I ordered for 2 people. Okay, so I ordered enough so that I wouldn't have to make dinner the next day, right? I was like,
sensible.
Yeah, I was like thinking about the future. Mm-hmm. But then I think the real shade comes because I ordered, fairly okay. My wife likes sweet and sour pork, which I realize is an Americanized Chinese food dish.
Mm-hmm.
But they chucked in a free order of crab rangoon.
Unbidden.
I ordered enough that I got a bonus, and they didn't give me a bonus of like, I don't know, like something. They gave me the American food.
To be clear, like there was not some disclaimer on the menu. It's like, hey, order $100 worth of food and get free crab rangoon. Like they literally just manifested in the bag.
Okay, first off, I didn't order $100 worth of food. The thing that happens at this place is if you order toward the end of their night, then often they'll chuck in a little bonus if you do a big order.
Those are the best.
Like, just to be clear, I love our local Chinese place. And if they're throwing shade at me by giving me the Americanized Chinese food, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little sad.
Dude, that's like when I lived across the street from an Escape from New York Pizza in my 20s and would stumble in there drunk at 1:30 in the morning, needing grease.
Yeah.
And they would be like, oh, we're about to close. Here you go.
Yeah.
And they would just give me some slices because they were about to throw it out anyway.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to go to the Escape on Haight because I used to live right up the street from there. And like occasionally you'd go in and that you'd like order a slice and then they just put like 2 more on top of it.
Yes.
It's good times. But so do you like, should I be affronted or do you think they were just trying to do something nice for me? That's the question.
I would say they appreciate your business.
But I feel like it's a little bit like, I feel like the extra chopsticks is a judgment. I feel like I'm being judged now.
Maybe they knew. Look, they just appreciate cleanliness. They knew you were going to eat this over a period of days. And they were like, oh, they're going to need new chopsticks every day because this is 4 days worth of food.
That's true. I did appreciate the extra fortune cookies, too. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Hello, Brad.
Hi. Hello. It's the most wonderful time of every 2 years.
It's video card season.
It's new video cards. Has it always been every 2 years, or did the pandemic stretch or elongate things out?
I think they stretched 6 months. It's usually about every 18 months.
Is it really?
But usually there's usually it's 2 years between new GPU kind of architectures. Mm-hmm. And then, or two generations between new. So there'll be like a launch one, and then there'll be an updated one, and then there'll be a new architecture. Is typically how it goes. Sometimes they stretch a third piece of hardware in there, a third generation, but usually it's like every, say, 3 years for new architectures.
You ever go back and, well, you probably don't do this because you reviewed cards, so you just touched all of them. But sometimes I go back and look at the entire history of NVIDIA GPU releases because I can kind of like clock eras of my life against them.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I remember when I gaffled that TNT2 out of my parents' new computer because they sure as hell didn't need it, and they could get by just fine on that Matrox Millennium. It probably looked better on the desktop anyway.
Yeah, you're doing them a favor.
And it's like, oh, I remember when I borrowed what was the one around Doom 3?
Oh, Doom 3 would have been like a 5800 or something like that.
Might have been a 6800 Ultra from the office.
Yeah, the 6800 would have been the good version of, like, the 5800 was the leaf blower.
Okay, yes, it was the one after that. Anyway, like there have been a ton of NVIDIA cards, and you can just go down the list and be like, oh, I bought that one. Oh, I borrowed that one. I managed to not steal, but somebody gave me a review sample of that one. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There have been a lot of them, is the point.
It's interesting. So for me, the thing on that is the tech demos. Like I like to occasionally, I even did it before, I want to say the first RTX stream. When they announced that, I went through and loaded up all of the old like the nymphs and the bells, the musical instruments and the night cities and the werewolves and all of that stuff. And it's fun. It's fun to go back and look at those because it shows what they were interested in highlighting more than anything.
Yeah. Like, it's the Fairy Grove to me.
Well, yeah,
I think that's the original hardware TNL. Isn't that what that was for? Like
I am terrible at remembering which one goes with which. The first fairy was the gecko is the one that is my all-time favorite because it's the one that had like .3 bump mapping and reflective maps and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool. And you could hit a button to switch between the different modes. So you could basically get like Mario 64 liquid metal, and then you could do translucency and you could do refraction and all sorts of other stuff.
Here it is. The GeForce 3.
That was a GeForce 3 one. Yeah.
I didn't have a 3, so I missed that one. I'm thinking about the it might have been like the first major tech demo they ever put out. It's nothing but some low poly trees and some colored lights flitting around them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was the original, like, hey, we do transforming lighting on the graphics card now. Look at this.
Yeah, well, and then later on they started doing like starting with the werewolf and the fairy with wings. They would basically say, "Hey, what happens if we throw the entire performance budget of the highest end card we have at one character?"
Yeah,
and that was always fun because like then you'd see stuff that was like 3 years out from actually shipping in hardware, like subsurface scattering on skin and stuff like that.
It's going to be 2 more graphics cards generations before you actually see games looking like this.
Exactly. But like. Even after 20 years of covering video cards, 20 plus 22-ish years of covering video cards off and on, I think that this 4090 is maybe the most interesting card I've tested in this entire run across AMD, Intel, everybody.
That's a large claim.
It's a real weird card. Like it's a weird launch. It's a weird because of the current state of the market. It's weird because like I don't exactly know who this card is for. Like I mean, look, realistically, this card is for people who do data science and machine learning stuff, and then also people who want the fastest possible thing.
That's has always been my impression of the 90 cards is like, hey, this is the only people who need this are people running giant workstations and people who have hot rod syndrome and just need to say they have the fastest thing.
There's a scientist in one of my Discords who does bioinformatics stuff, and she has a bunch of 90 series cards in workstations to do data math, right?
Oh, that sounds awesome. Math.
Like everyone, like during the pandemic, at one point she posted a picture of like 12 3090s or something stacked on top of each other in boxes, and people hit the floor.
All right, you've just made me realize I have this is a long-standing life ambition that I've just now identified as an ambition, and it is to run a farm of something. I don't know what. Probably not a farm
like
of
potatoes. I do tomatoes probably. Maybe corn.
I mean a data farm.
Oh.
Like,
look, you could have gotten real into crypto like 6 months ago, but that ship has sailed sadly. Maybe Goodly probably.
Just put together a Raspberry Pi cluster and call it a day.
And a Raspberry Pi cluster is kind of you can do a lot with a Raspberry Pi cluster these days.
Yeah, I think people run like little web servers off of them and stuff.
Oh yeah. You can do a traffic router or the whole thing.
Get one of those little rack blade things that holds like 12 pies.
Yeah, it's a cluster of pies. So we're okay. So today we're going to talk about the 4090, but more we're going to talk about the Ada series of Ada architecture from Nvidia, which is their new. It succeeds Ampere, which succeeds Turing, and those are kind of the ray tracing. It's the next in the line of ray tracing cores from Nvidia.
I thought they were going to go with Lovelace, but then we showed up for that editor's day and everybody was just saying Ada. And I was like, oh, I guess it's easier to say.
I think Ada is easier to say. The interesting thing. This card is interesting. This 4090 is interesting. And rather than I figured this time we would do this in the reverse order than we usually do. And we're going to tell you tell you about the card and whether it's worth buying, and then jump to the stuff that's about why it's interesting for people who care.
Yeah.
So like we can front load this with, no, you probably don't need to buy a $1,600 video card.
Is that your assessment? My
assessment is, okay. Yes, that is my short-term assessment. I'm going to tell you why now.
Okay.
It's stupid fast on everything I tested it in. I put it in.
Hang on.
Yeah.
I mean, go on.
It's so
when you come out and say it's, I don't know, man, you're making a pretty good case for it.
It's so stupid fast that you can't get full. Okay, there's some hardware that is coming out very soon that we don't know how it's going to perform from Intel because there's still embargoes on the new Intel CPUs that were announced a couple weeks ago. It seems like it is CPU bound on basically all the hardware that's available right now, unless you do some crazy overclocking stuff.
Including the Ryzens that are less than a month old.
Including the month-old Ryzens. I don't know about the next-gen Intel stuff, but judging by how it performed from people who tested on the current-gen Intel stuff, seems unlikely that they're going to blow through any performance barriers.
Yeah, I don't think Raptor Lake is that different from. We'll have Gordon soon, right?
Yeah, I think Gordon's going to come by next week. Is the plan?
I think the early info is that I don't think Raptor is a huge like architectural change from older.
Well, and what CPU bound means is that the CPU is the bottleneck for most performance on this GPU because the GPU is so massively overpowered for games. This is why when people say, "Hey, this isn't for people who play games," this is what they mean. It only really makes sense if you're playing games at 4K. If you're competitive at 1440, like Nvidia made a case that they think that competitive gamers are going to move from 1080p to 1440. And by competitive, I don't mean like, I play Call of Duty every night. I mean, like I'm on an esports team and I play for money and stuff like that. I'm skeptical of that because 1080 has a lot of benefits, both for people who are playing and streaming. And also like frame dips are death in a competitive shooter where like flicks or pixel precision matter. So my guess is that people are going to go for higher frame rate versus slightly more resolution and lower frame rate.
Here's a sidebar. Do you think anybody in the esports world is using any kind of reconstruction, DLSS, AMD FSR, or do they only want native resolution because they can't afford any like wayward pixel artifacts from the reconstruction, like they only want native rendering?
So that is a really good question. I actually don't have any idea what the answer to that is. I know of the competitive games, I don't think, I think actually Call of Duty supports DLSS 2. I think Apex supports DLSS 2.
Yeah,
I don't know what does. Like the CPU bound stuff like Counter-Strike and Fortnite and those games mostly flipped on reflex. So I'm wondering, I don't know what the thought is on DLSS and competitive games. I'd love to hear what people know if there's word out there on that.
Yeah, I mean the use case to me is like trying to land a sniper rifle headshot from a very long distance where the head you're aiming at is probably only a few pixels high.
So my experience playing Fortnite with DLSS on is that the artifacting in DLSS doesn't impact players. It impacts scenery that's moving around you. So things like chain link fences and stuff with that kind of pattern is where the artifacting pops up, not necessarily on stuff with high contrast, like a person standing on a ridge line or something like that. But I am definitely not an expert on that. So it really only makes sense at 4K. That said, everything I tested at 1080p basically gave me double the performance of a 3080 Ti in both ray tracing and raster benchmarks.
Double.
And when you that's without turning DLSS on. When you turn DLSS on, you're looking at 4 times the performance in a lot of cases.
For ray tracing as well?
For ray tracing as well. So
man,
I was able to play. So there's a beta. So, okay. First off, disclosure, everything that I'm talking about testing was on a beta branch that was set up by Nvidia for this because the DLSS 3 implementations aren't in shipping products yet.
Branch of drivers or
on
games?
Steam. On Steam. So we were using pre-release drivers provided as part of the review kits. And we were all of these games, including Cyberpunk, Plague Tale Requiem, Flight Sim, and F1 2022, or F1 22 rather, were all tested with beta branches. So presumably DLSS 3 will be coming in the not too distant future. It is not shipping on anything as far as I can tell yet. DLSS 3 fucking kicks ass.
Okay, that's interesting to hear because I have seen a lot of skepticism out there and I don't necessarily disagree about the frame insertion in particular.
I'm going to tell you, I can't tell a difference.
Okay.
I am not super sensitive to artifacting generally, but I do notice DLSS artifacts in DLSS 2 games where you have like noise around chain link fences and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think in my case, and I think for most people, it's more latency that was the concern with frame insertion.
So the latency, the thing I will tell you is that even when the DLSS 3 stuff doesn't improve the frame rate as dramatically as it does in, say, Cyberpunk at 1080p, you're still seeing an enormous reduction in micro-stutters.
Okay.
So they target the 1%. So there's something Nvidia started paying attention to a few years ago when they, prior to Reflex coming out, but around that time, which is like, what's the average frame rate for the slowest 1% of frames? And that's a pretty good, like if there's a big delta between that and your average frame rate, that's a pretty good indicator that you have a lot of micro-stutters. So what the DLSS 3 stuff does is smooths out those slowest 1% of frames and brings them back up closer to the mean, which makes the whole game feel really, really buttery smooth in a way that is difficult to, like, it doesn't necessarily show in benchmarks. The tools that we typically use to benchmark don't register those inserted frames because they happen later in the pipeline than the benchmarks register frame rates. And you have to use some special tests, special tools to see the difference. But it feels noticeably different when you turn it on. Like,
that sounds pretty good.
For example, Cyberplunk. Cyberplunk.
Oh no, it's Cyberplunk from now on.
Cyberplunk now. When you're playing Cyberplunk at either 4K or 1080p with DLSS 3 on and the ray tracing turned all the way up, it felt like you were not. It felt smooth in a way that I've never felt a ray tracing game to play.
I was going to say all of what you're describing, not even just DLSS 3, but even just the general perf over the 3080 Ti. Like, this is all sounding to me like the first time, and maybe hopefully this is also the case with the 4080s, because the 4090 again is maybe not the card everybody's going to get. But it's sounding like the first time that you might actually turn on ray tracing as just a matter of course and just say, of course, I'm going to play the ray tracing mode in this game and not worry about the performance hit, because like they've just been on the cusp for a while of like 50 FPS. I can't quite do it. It's almost there. Like if you could keep a locked 60, for example, on a given card, like, okay, I could do ray tracing. But
yeah,
when you're dipping a little bit below that, even with, adaptive sync, adaptive refresh and all that stuff, like it's just not quite there.
So,
but if you're getting into those numbers with ray tracing, it's like, oh yes, I'll just use ray tracing then.
On the i9 at 4K, like the average frame rate in the benchmark was like mid 50s, 52, 50, something like that on my test with the DLSS 3 turned on and on the performance setting.
Okay.
But it was solid. And
wait, at what resolution?
At 4K.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess
but 4K with DLSS 3 is an internal resolution of like 1080p scaled up, right? So
right. I guess for me, I'm not trying to play 4K anyway, so that's
right.
I don't know. I wonder what the market segmentation is at this point. How many people are actually trying to game at 4K? I don't feel like 4K monitors are quite where they should be yet for me.
I mean, so for me, I would take higher refresh rate over 4K, and to get 144 hertz 4K monitor, you have to spend like $850 right now.
Yeah, pricing, and also like depends on the OS, but like UI scaling, I feel like it's still also not quite there universally.
Windows 11 is pretty like so. My setup is that I have a 4K monitor up top and a 1080p monitor down low. I play games on the 1080p monitor most of the time, but occasionally I'll switch up for something single player. I'm pretty comfortable playing. Like I was comfortable playing Cyberpunk at 50 at the frame rate that I was getting because it was stable and it wasn't up and down. Like because there weren't those micro stutters.
Yeah, that's fair.
Felt a lot smoother than it felt smoother than what I associate a 50 frame per second average feels like.
Okay, and just again to reiterate, because I don't have the numbers in front of me, this was at 4K with DLSS 3.
With DLSS 3,
definitely,
and ray tracing cranked up all the way.
Okay, so not native 4K.
Not native 4K. I don't think anything ray tracing is going to run native 4K for the time being.
Yeah.
So the takeaway. So there were 4 or 5 titles supported, some tech demos supported, and a Korean RPG or Chinese MMORPG. I think was the fifth was the last game that was in the hey we can help you figure out how to test this stuff. My assumption is that the number of titles that support DLSS 3 will explode in the same way that the DLSS support has exploded, because the plugin as a developer is relatively simple to implement. You basically, it's drop in for Unreal and Unity, and you generally don't have to do too much work to get it up and running. I think like when we put it in the Anacrusis, it was a half day work for an engineer and then a little bit of testing and tuning.
Jeez, that's pretty fast. And I assume that it's just like 3 is a superset of 2. Like it would just gracefully fall back, or more to the point, you do the work once and it supports all versions based on the hardware. That's
it. So if you use the DLSS 3 plugin and somebody's using 2 series or 3 series GPUs, they'll get DLSS 2 support. It also DLSS 3. We'll talk about how DLSS 3 works later on, but it also that comes with reflex support now, basically because of because of the way the frame insertion works. So DLSS 3, the short version of DLSS 3 is that it inserts frames to fill in the lowest frame rate gaps, and it makes the whole thing feel like you're running a lot faster. And in games that are like pure CPU bound games like Flight Sim, you literally get a 2x performance boost for turning on DLSS 3.
That's pretty substantial. I mean, the concern, you tell me, at least my concern is, you're not sampling input on artificially created frames, right? You're only sampling input for native frames, and so that seemed like it might cause some kind of weirdness with just control feel, but you seem to.
I didn't notice it. I didn't play as much Flight Sim, which is a lower frame rate game, and stuff like playing Cyberpunk with a gamepad or with a mouse and keyboard. I didn't notice any like input lag, partly because of part of the reason is they use the reflex no screen buffer technology to make it to reduce latency on the pipeline end as the CPU is feeding the video card. So yeah, it's a trip. Like the whole thing is a trip. It's really weird talking about this card because it's a really, really fast card. I don't know that any hardware exists right now that can take full advantage of this card in games, unless if you're playing at 8K, I guess. I don't know how many 8K monitors are available. It seems like not many.
Is there a game on the market that has built-in support for running at 8K?
I mean, I think everything will run. I think you can set the resolution. The games will just pull if they're set up right. We'll just pull
Well, it's very game dependent. Some of them are artificially constrained. Some of them, I don't feel like a lot of games just pull from available OS resolutions at this point, do they?
I feel like they mostly have a subset of resolutions they support out of that pulled list. But I don't know.
I'm sorry. I found a page on Nvidia support.
Oh,
entitled recommended 8K titles.
I bet Watch Dogs Legion is on there.
Is it? No, it is not.
Doom
Eternal, Apex Legends, Control, Genshin Impact, Warframe, Smite, Left 4 Dead 2.
The Left 4 Dead 2 will support every resolution. When you pull down Source Engine games, it gives you every resolution that the computer supports, that Windows reports.
I want to play World of Warcraft Classic at 8K.
God.
Go back to my 2004 self and say, just look at this. Just
put 4K TVs in a quad and then frame combine those and you're good to go. I think even with new CPUs, raster games with these cards are going to be CPU bound. Through a comedy of errors, I had some 12th gen Intel hardware lined up to test with, and it just hasn't gotten here in time. So unfortunately, all of my testing was with the i9, which I think is actually kind of interesting because like the i9 that I built was a 2080 Ti machine, I think originally. And like, if you're like that's where the upgrade sweet spot is for this. I think like if you're looking at these cards, if you're looking to upgrade your 2000 series or 1000 series NVIDIA cards, this is the generation you want to jump to, right? Because there's actually going to be substantial performance improvements. The DLSS 3 stuff is presumably going to kick down to the lower end cards from the 4090, so it'll work the same way. And frankly, this card is kind of a pain in the ass. Like uses an enormous amount of power. I think its TDP is 450 something watts.
Yes, that's correct. Something they said I don't know if you can speak to this or not. I think other reviewers have tested this, that they said in those sessions we were in that they have worked to eliminate transient spikes on the power draw.
I am not set up to test transient spikes on the power draw
because like the 30 series cards were real bad about exceeding TDP by a lot.
Yeah.
To the point that it's
for instantaneous spikes, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just very short, but it doesn't matter how short it is. It's if it's enough to put too much load on the power supply, then you're screwed. So
it's why they started shipping 3080 Ti's with three or four PCI Express connectors. But yeah, I didn't. So the people that I trust that did reviews did not find that it was doing the transient spikes. I didn't see anything that would indicate that.
I haven't looked too closely at other reviews, but the chatter I saw was that stuff has gotten smoothed out quite a bit, which is good.
It seems to be resolved. It also is entirely possible that we're not hitting, that no one is able to put a full load on this thing.
That does actually seem possible. Now that you mention it.
The min spec for PSUs is 850 watts. If you have a big Intel CPU, I'm going to say you probably want 1,000 watts just to be safe.
Boy, as someone who just bought a power supply like 2-3 months ago, I originally bought an 850 watt, and B&H shipped me an open box, which I sent back. And because they didn't have another 850 watt in stock, I bought 1,000, and now I'm feeling like even that 1,000 was maybe lowballing it.
I think the 1,000 is safe. Like the theoretical maximum that you're going to pull from a 15 amp 120 volt circuit in the US is 1,600 watts.
Yeah,
and like that's going to reduce by 20% because of the kind of overhead and heat and stuff like that. But
sure. Well, the other thing, I'm guessing you're not living this life yet, right? But I am pretty committed to undervolting hardware at this point.
I am not doing that on the current machine, but I think if I build a Ryzen next, that's probably in my future.
I mean, they built that right into the BIOS. On the new Ryzens have that eco mode where you can just straight up say like, hey, run this at 65 watts because it's still going to get you almost all the, like, it's crazy. This race to the top that we've been seeing across both CPUs and GPUs is like kind of unfortunate because I don't have the exact numbers, but a little bit of the review stuff I was looking at, it seems like they're pumping triple digit watts into these cards to achieve an extra like 3 to 5% just for benchmark purposes. And like, who needs that?
That's the game, man.
Who needs that?
Well, so I
mean, maybe this is my work from home talking, my small business owner talking that I have to pay for all of the electricity for my work myself now. I'm trying to keep it somewhat sensible.
It turns out that your power bill goes way up when you work from home and have a giant ass PC that you play games and work on all day. The thing that's interesting about that though is that I think that the more than overclocking the GPU on this go round, being able to overclock the CPU and system memory are probably going to be the performance bottlenecks on these cards, at least for the current gen hardware.
Just in terms of being able to feed the card fast enough.
Like if you want the card to run it, like if you want to get better performance out of a machine that has one of these cards, you're probably going to be better off overclocking your CPU and your RAM than overclocking the GPU. The card's a big chunky boy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about physical installation as well.
It's 3 slots wide instead of 2, which is different than the 3090s were 2 slots wide, but they were very long and very kind of tall.
When you say wide, you mean tall?
No, I mean it's 3. Like it fills 3 slots.
That's vertical.
Well, but
I'm being very pedantic here.
Yeah, no, I mean it's 3. The width is how many slots it takes up in the case. The height is how far it is from the motherboard.
I know. I mean, in a tower,
just because you're living in a tower world doesn't mean that that's the way the world works.
Who's not using a tower card? Or
but anyway, okay. So it is shorter than the 3090s by it fits in an H510, which the 3090s theoretically don't.
Oh, that is the opposite of what I expected to hear because. Usually length is usually the real problem, right? Because people have got drive cages in various cases and stuff. Like that's usually the thing that stops you from installing a gigantic card.
Yeah, that's not a problem. It fit in my H510 nicely. I was kind of surprised. I did turn up the amount of air that comes in on the intakes on both the front and the side though. And then at the top.
It's probably too early to ask about SAG. He's rolling under the desk.
I'm looking. It hasn't. Our friend of the pod, Wedge, asked about this the other day, and I have not seen any sagging yet. I do not have anything bracing it, but I think that's probably in the future.
I mean, that's straight.
Alternately, I'll do a vertical install.
Yeah, that's straight up a product category now. You can just get PCIe slot bracers for $15 to hold up your goddamn 20-pound graphics card.
Yeah, it's like the box and stuff for it is ridiculous. It comes in like this big, ridiculous unfolding presentation case that has like it's mounted diagonally in between this big cube, so it takes up like 3 times as much space as a box than you need.
Any differences in the cooler? I mean, it's pretty much the same as the Ampere cards, right?
It's the blow through cooler with the V cut out on the actual card and like fans on both sides, one blowing through and one blowing across, or one blowing out. The cooler seems quieter. The 3080 Ti Founders Edition cards were not particularly loud. Like even under full load, it didn't blow that hard. So this seems comparable to me. I mean, under the desk, I don't hear it, even when I'm playing a ray trace game at full bore.
Any since we're talking about card form factors, before we move on, any thoughts about the AIB cards that I assume you've seen photos of out there?
The big third party ones.
Have you seen that Asus one in particular that side by side with the Founders Edition that is like 3 times the size?
It is really big.
Like, what is it at? Who has a case that could fit that?
I mean, full towers, man.
People
do full towers.
That thing is terrifying.
I was gonna say. So the other thing about this is that there's a new power connector.
Yeah, that's another thing that, like, I mean, it's not a big deal, but they went and announced that PCIe 5 power connector like the fucking month after. I gotta take that back. I went back and looked. They announced that connector in like February.
Yeah.
But Seasonic went and announced a new model of power supply with that connector on it like a week after I bought my new power supply.
Well, I mean, so if you have a modular supply, it's not a big deal because you can get a modular connector from your vendor. Like Corsair's already has one listed. I don't think they're shipping them yet.
It's, what is it, 12 pin, I want to say?
It's I actually don't remember this. The thing is, it's smart, so it has power load monitoring that comes back into the power supply,
and that's built into the spec.
Oh,
wow, that's crazy! I didn't know about that.
The one Nvidia ships an adapter with the card that plugs into 4 standard PCIe power connectors. You know the 4
the 8-pin. There's the
8-pin one. It's the standard 8-pin one. It's annoying because they literally just rolled out a new power connector in the last generation that immediately was no longer sufficient for this thing.
Like I went and got, I mean, it was free. It was free from my power supply vendor, but I went and got one of those 12-pin adapters for, I assumed that was the new Nvidia connector of record for some generations to come, and used it for one. It's fine. It's fine.
I spent money on a cable. I regret it. So, okay. Is it worth buying? We said this before. It's the Founders Edition is $1,600. The add-in boards are even more expensive in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
This is profoundly not a card that is for people who play games.
Yeah.
At least not stuff that's currently available. Maybe if you really are into ray traced games.
Sure. I mean, I'm not sitting here running the numbers. It sounds like for like performance per dollar is pretty damn good on this thing compared to the previous generation. But the bigger question is, do you need that much performance?
Well,
and it sounds like most people don't.
I was going to say there's a couple of gotchas. The card only supports DisplayPort 1.4,
yes,
which gives you like 8K at 60 hertz, or anything over 4K is going to be a 60 hertz refresh rate.
That's,
without compression.
I'm not sweating that so much.
I mean, I went and looked. I couldn't find DisplayPort 2.0 monitors on the market right now. It seems like it probably matters more for like high end VR headsets.
Sure.
Because they actually, high refresh rates, high resolution, multiple panels will do more bandwidth than like a 4K at 144 hertz monitor.
Are there VR headsets plugging into DisplayPort?
Pimax and some of them are, yes.
Oh wow.
The Index plugs into most of the PC, except for the Windows mixed reality headsets. Most of them are deep DisplayPort.
Oh man, it tells you how long it's been since I saw a new headset in person.
Yeah. It's a problem for the future. It feels like an omission on a card that's the like top of the line, super expensive, especially since I think AMD is shipping DisplayPort 2.0.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it.
The big question I have after this whole thing is like, why is Nvidia not leading with the more reasonably priced cards, and why are they kicking the big boy out first?
Yeah.
I have some theories. We can
run those down.
This.
I mean, do we need to run those down? Because like they announced 3 SKUs. I'm sure everybody knows at this point. There are 2 4080s, which I think it's the first time that's ever happened at launch.
I mean, so there's always been variation in the 4080s because the AIB partners will like clock the memory differently and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, coming straight from Nvidia, although Nvidia selling its own cards is in and of itself a relatively new phenomenon. So that's,
recent generations.
And also like this sure does dovetail with that EVGA episode we did. a few weeks ago.
What a weird coincidence.
That these Founders Edition cards for the Ada generation are quite nice. And then you've got this like monstrosity coming from a major third-party partner. You know what I mean? Like, where are we headed with this? Like, are we actually going to get to the point where are they just going to buy up a couple of AIBs and just start selling all the cards themselves?
I don't think they need to buy the AIBs.
Well, no, but then they have to do all the work to establish the supply chain themselves, is what I'm saying.
I think they've been gradually working toward that this whole time.
I don't know. Be.
I think that's why EVGA bailed out of the market, probably in retrospect.
Well, sure, but buying a couple of partners with established assembly lines certainly speeds that process.
Maybe. So yeah, the 24080s are the only other cards that they've announced. They're not going to be available until late this year or early next year, I think.
November. Those come out next month.
No, okay, but I mean, realistically, you're not going to get them until next year.
I wonder if you could. Yeah, let me hang on.
So 4090s sold out pretty fast. They went on sale 2 days ago.
I was going to see.
And even the local screwdriver shops don't have usually Central Computer would have something in stock and they just mark it up real high.
Yeah.
They didn't have anything 4090-ish in stock that I saw this morning or yesterday.
Do you think,
but they didn't sell out instantly. Like you could go to Micro Center and get one at the end of the day on Wednesday in some places. I like friend of the stream JP did that, I believe.
Oh. Interesting.
He also is the only streamer I know who plays games at 4K. So
sure. He's a tech guy for sure.
Yeah. So he's living large right now.
Were you not in the rarefied position to be getting a video card straight from Nvidia?
Yeah.
Like if you were out there buying one, do you think you'd be at the point yet where it would be Founders Edition or nothing? Would you be like trying to get that one because it's
I tend to value reliability over other things.
Yeah.
So I would probably do look, the Founders Edition cards have had problems. I want to say the 1000 series Founders Edition cards had issues where they had to were
there 1000 series? I thought
maybe it was 2000. But the first couple of generations of Founders Edition cards both had defects that required them to fix.
Interesting.
Not like massive soup. It wasn't like everything. It wasn't like an Xbox 360 where everything died eventually. It was like a large, some noticeably large percentage had failures.
Okay. I'm still using a launch Founders Edition 3080 and it seems to have held up. I don't know of any
I would expect that to be fine.
Any widespread issues with that generation.
Yeah. I would be shocked if that had problems.
I'm fascinated by this transition that appears to be going on where Nvidia seems to be trying to wrest more control of the market from its partners.
I mean, it's a weird situation. Okay, so that's a good segue though, because like I think that's one of the reasons that I think they launched with I've been thinking about this. Like this is the thing I've been thinking about a lot. Is why did they lead with the 4090? Because like leading with the $1,600 card is going to piss off a lot of people. They're not going to sell a massive volume in this, but the margin on this card is probably pretty good. I don't understand. Like they usually lead with the lower priced cards because that's where the fat part of the market is and they want to get those out as soon as possible. So they didn't launch with either. They still have a lot of 3080s in the supply chain and they don't want to hose all the add-in board partners and have to buy back a bunch of chips or bail people out or whatever, which is, I think, probably part of it, right? Because everybody overproduced 3080s because of the crypto glut. And then when Ethereum switched to proof of stake rather than proof of work, the market for high-end GPUs to do crypto shit evaporated overnight. One of the things that you and I had talked about before that I've kind of theorized is that maybe the 4080 will actually be faster because they're clocking things higher, clocking CPU and memory higher because they're the 4090, the 90 series cards are typically about width and not speed. So it's about doing massive parallel math, maybe at a slightly slower speed. So it's the equivalent of having, 32 cores in your CPU that run at 75% of the speed versus having 16 cores in your CPU that run at 100% of the speed.
Right.
I don't think, looking at the specs on paper, assuming they ship the specs that they told us, I don't think that's the case. Because the 4080 has reduced both RT and raster workload performance based on stuff like the tensor and RT cores, the number of tensor and RT cores for ray tracing workloads, and the memory bandwidth and texel fill rates and pixel fill rates based on the specs that they gave. I think it's possible maybe that DLSS 3 is good enough that it makes the low end cards too good. So like if these cards, even at the lower specs, are still CPU bound on all existing hardware, most existing hardware, then DLSS 3 comes into play. And that all of a sudden means that you're going to see the same performance, roughly the same performance on the same CPU out of all the ray tracing benchmarks, which is great for people who are buying lower end cards, but doesn't make this card look particularly appetizing at $1,600.
Okay, that sounds like a plausible reason to put this thing out and nothing else next to it.
Yeah.
For a month and try to sell these while you can before people realize, oh, I should just get one of those.
The other options are that it's competitive stuff. So maybe AMD and Intel, maybe they were worried about either what AMD or Intel are. I mean, Intel is launching new GPUs for the first time in 10 years.
Yes.
15 years. AMD has new hardware coming. Maybe they were worried that they're not going to be either won't be competitive at one of the price points or just wanted to cut the knees out from under whatever those offerings are, which is a very Nvidia move.
Hard to read the tea leaves right now. Like it sounds like RDNA 3 is going to be pretty competitive in everything except maybe ray tracing.
Yeah, but and ray tracing is really a tricky spot right now because there's a half dozen games that are coming out, right, that are ray traced games probably this year. I think we're going to start to see more as Unreal Engine 5 games start to ship later this year.
Probably not wrong.
Sorry, later in 2023, not later in 2022.
Do you agree that the consoles launching when they did is probably going to hamstring ray tracing adoption for kind of the entirety of this generation? I mean, those consoles barely do ray tracing at all.
I think it.
And my feeling since like the 360 era is that kind of graphics and tech features largely trickle down from the consoles because that's where the mass market is. I mean, like obviously you can do extra work on your PC ports, but the core of your pipeline, of your like asset pipeline tech, everything is going to be kind of in a cross-platform game is going to be defined by the lowest common denominator that sells the most, right?
I think the gate is if the current gen PS5 and Xbox Series are fast enough to run global illumination stuff versus the pre-rendered lighting.
So my gut feeling is they are not.
I don't know. I think it's going to require. I think that we're going to see a fairly typical console adoption curve on that stuff because it's going to require so global illumination, instead of using pre-rendered light maps to light the vast majority of the map and having a handful of dynamic map lights in the map, you just basically do everything dynamically and have base lighting for the whole level established.
It's essentially using ray tracing for your entire generalized lighting model. And I don't think I could be wrong. Maybe as development matures on the new console hardware, they'll get there. But the early indications were that performance is not strong.
Well, it requires you starting the game. Like if you're doing a game that takes place entirely outside, it's less of a problem because the sun is a fairly fixed lighting source and you're dealing with a base level of brightness. This is why like Call of Duty is able to put shadows on in ray tracing. It doesn't really impact performance all that much, right? I think my guess is somebody's going to figure something out. But in order to do that, you're going to have to start the game with, hey, this is a global illumination game from day one. And then every choice that you make is based on that and the performance you're going to get on that, because it's going to change everything, every aspect of the art creation throughout the entire process of making the game.
That's entirely possible. Yeah, like we might very well see the Doom 3 of these consoles in terms of like a game that just pushes the state of the art forward in a dramatic way.
Yeah, it's not the thing about global changing your lighting model like that is it's not like I said, DLSS was a half day work for an engineer and then a little bit of testing. Switching to global illumination requires a complete redo of your art pipeline and your rendering pipeline for the game. So it is a foundational decision that you make at the start of a project, not something you tack on at the end. Right.
Also, I think like UE5 throws a whole wrench into this thing, right? Because Lumen is not ray tracing based at all.
Lumen is buck wild and it changed. Yeah, it's who knows what. Like Lumen is weirdly CPU based. Right. Like there's a bunch of weird choices there. So, and then the last thought is that if it's not competitiveness, it's not that DLSS is too good and the perf on the lower end cards will be too good. If it's not that there's too many 3080s, it's that they think that there's pent up demand because people haven't been able to buy GPUs and they can, hit people for $1,600, a bunch of $1,600 cards because that's what you were paying for a 3080 like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And if that was your choice, if you want to spend $1,600 on a video card and you waited to buy a 3080 and you're buying this, you did pretty well because this card fucking rips compared to a 3080.
Sure. Any thoughts on the two 4080 SKUs having different GPUs on them? I mean, like by product code, they are 8103 and 8102. And when you have two different cards, they're both called 4080, and on the box, the only distinguishing factor is the amount of RAM. You kind of assume like, oh, this is probably the same card otherwise, but that is extremely not the case.
So remember when we talked about, I think we'll find out when benchmarks land.
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit of a dip in RT cores between the 12 gig and the 16 gig model.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hold on. I forgot one other person. If you do video editing and you're working with AV1, especially, this card is a no-brainer.
Yeah. Or even streaming to Twitch. I really wish I had jumped in and asked them in those editor sessions, because they spent quite a bit of time talking about how great AV1 was going to be for streaming.
There's no support on Twitch yet for AV1.
Nobody supports AV1 ingest yet. Nobody supports anything but H.264 still.
OBS doesn't support output yet. So the beta support is out now, I think, but it's not in mainline until later this year.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
But also the ARC cards support AV1 encoding. Like, so do the new AMD cards that are coming. Like, everything that's coming out this year, if you buy any of those cards, I believe, unless maybe some of the low end models don't have it, but it sounds like the industry finally is moving on to a new codec.
But it's time.
Like it's way past time.
Yeah.
I found. I guess I won't name and shame. I found a test stream on Twitch. The person who owns the channel is one of Twitch's like top video codec engineers. I mean, it says it right in his bio. He's like, "Hey, I'm Twitch's video codec guy."
Yeah,
and it's an AV1 stream. It's from like 2 years ago. It's just sitting there.
Well, that's not.
It's fucking.
Wait, he gets to keep stuff for 2 years?
I guess so. I'm sure there are probably some special flags enabled on this account, but like the archive of the stream is sitting there, and you can go into the settings on this stream, and he plays like Call of Duty and Fortnite and Apex and maybe one or two other things. Tomb Raider, I think. But you can go into the settings, and like in the typical settings pop up on the Twitch player, there are settings like 1440p 120 AV1.
Wow.
So you can go see this.
So the player's there. They just don't have the code. They don't have the transcode backend for it, I bet yet.
The player supports it. You can go, but you can get a sense of what it's going to be like, because you can go watch a 1440p 120 stream, and it looks pretty damn good for Twitch bit rates.
Well, so that's the benefit of AV1 is that you get it's about 40% more efficient, and it's not encumbered by patents, so you can use it without having to pay anybody.
Yes.
So the upshot is you get 1440p at current 1080p bit rates and equivalent image quality, or you do 1080p with much higher IQ at the current bit rates,
like massively better,
which
quality.
Sounds great. Yes. I'm all for that.
Yes.
Okay, so we were talking about whether you should buy this. It's a weird card. I before I spent $1,600 on this, I would wait to see what the 4080s look like. Honestly,
yes, for sure.
Because the 4080 price points, even with the weirdness of the two different dies. So you'd asked about the two different dies. It's weird to have the two different dies with different numbers of shader cores and tensor cores and stuff like that.
Because this is essentially the segmentation you'd normally see between either a 4080 and a TI, or a 4080 and a 4070. I don't know which direction that's going here, but like which version of that do you think this is?
Well, usually the TI is a mid cycle bump.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
My guess is that this would be the 4070 and the 4080, but it also may be that at the resolutions people play games at, there's no difference in perf with the changes in these dies. So this may be a binning issue where they're just like, where if they're having yield problems and there's a certain number of RT cores or whatever per die that don't work, they just shut those off and they sell it as the 12 gig part. My guess is that this 12 gig, 16 gig segmentation has to do with memory controllers. And this is probably the reason EVGA isn't building these cards.
Interesting.
Because it doesn't give them the ability to change memory configuration. And the fact that they're on GDDR6 and there's not a lot of overhead beyond what they're shipping on the Founders editions means that they can't make a better card. They couldn't make a better card, So presumably, if they're building an 8104, which is the 12 gig 4080 die, they can't make a 16 gig version of that because of the way the memory controllers work.
Yes, 102, 80-102 is the 12 gig 4080.
Oh, see, 80-102 is the 4090. 80-104 is the 12 gig 4080.
This image you put in the show notes is so scrunched that
it's backwards and
8
small.
looks like a 9. I was trying to, okay, these numbers are very hard to read.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
One of the things I thought was the most interesting in the presentation that we sat in on was that they went out of their way to emphasize that the 3080 is going to remain part of their product offering. And
my guess is that the 3080 is going to be the 4070 equivalent for the current run.
That's exactly what it.
Yeah,
that's how that read to me. And again, that's largely probably because they overproduced so many and they need to sell them. But also, but it's still notable because I don't think they've ever done that before, right? Don't they? They typically do the Apple style clean sweep of the old product line and just say, okay, here's all the new cards. The old ones are going to sell through and then they're gone. But they very much seem to be emphasizing, the low end 4080 is 900.
Somebody asked in the Q&A whether they were still producing 3080s, and they did not answer that.
So that I think that's the real key is not, do they have a glut of cards they need to sell through? It's, are they going to keep making them and keep that in the product line? Because again, so the low end 4080 is 900, and I want to say the 3080 is still 7.
The 38 they didn't give 3080 pricing, updated 3080 pricing in the new regime.
It's hard to find MSRP because prices are so all over the place for cards right now. I think most of the 3080s I'm seeing are around 700, 750, 760.
I would guess that when the 4080s come out, the 3080s will drop to $500 to $600.
Right. But again, like they're going to continue to be available for a while. And like those are still perfectly fine cards for 1080 or 1440.
Well, so here's the thing though. I don't know that, like I want to see what DLSS 3 performance looks like on these other things. I want to see how many games support it in the next 3 to 6 months.
For sure.
Like
I just mean like a $900 card is not exactly entry level for a lot of people.
No. And I think if you can get I think if you can get a 4070 with DLSS 3 and it performs the same way that it does on the 4090, like it's much better to spend $600 on that than $600 on a last gen card.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that relies on the existence of a 4070 though. That's what I was getting at, is there's just not that much room in the pricing strata right now. There's nowhere for a 4070 to slot pricing wise between the low end 4080 and a 3080.
Well, I think at some point, I think my assumption is that when the 3080s run out, that's when the 4070 will roll out. And,
you're probably
right. Typically the 3070 the 70 series cards are a little bit later. So,
yeah.
So that's the kind of the TLDR. Do you want to dig into some of the hardcore, like the more detailed stuff on how these cards actually work? Because they did some neat stuff.
Yeah.
It's on the 4 nanometer TSMC process, which I thought was interesting, which is why the cards are faster and run the same temperature as the old cards. They updated the RT cores, the ray tracing cores.
Mm-hmm.
So they have roughly 2x the triangle eval power, which means that's the number of bounces they can evaluate on triangles per cycle.
Yeah. I'm sitting here trying to read through these notes I wrote down at 6 a.m. about these GPUs and trying to make sense of them.
Well, so they're the upshot of the triangle eval power is that they're 2x faster at the raw ray tracing math. And then they did some other stuff. Like there's dedicated hardware on the board that kind of tessellates high complexity models down to lower complexity models for the lighting calculations, the ray tracing lighting calculations.
Yeah, it's basically the same stuff they've been doing with raster rendering for 20 years or whatever.
It's like they res it down and then they do the math on the lighting and then they res it back up and they apply the lighting math to the up-resed triangles, and the results are indistinguishable from running the math on the full ones at a fraction of the frame rate.
Yeah, they've also done some reordering with the way that the ray bounces are processed, because they basically said in the old model certain units were kind of sitting semi-idle. Because of the unpredictable and variable way that scenes are kind of laid out.
Yeah, so I think they specifically mentioned brushed metal in one of the white papers. Like brushed metal surfaces are computationally expensive for ray tracing to figure out,
right?
Because there's a diffusion and reflection there, and so this, when you hit a brushed metal surface, it'll shift load from one core to the other to kind of like balance that out.
Basically, just trying to make sure all the units are working efficiently at all times.
Yeah, and then they also added dedicated hardware to handle opacity better in ray tracing workloads. And the specific examples here were like leaves. So previously foliage was computationally really expensive on 2 series cards, and they said you'll see some substantial performance increase in areas where that comes into play.
Yeah. Those sessions are fun to sit in on, just if you want to get a sense of what's going on internally and how they're able to claim things like 2x the ray tracing performance. I mean, they don't matter much to people who just want to buy a card and run games faster, but it's really interesting from an academic standpoint.
It's absolutely nuts. Yeah. The level of detail, like when you look at a 30-page Digital Foundry article or a 30-minute Digital Foundry video that goes into the detail about how every single aspect of this works, this is where they share that information. You get to talk to a lot of engineers and ask questions and stuff, which is fun.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that the cards are limited to DisplayPort 1.4.
Yes.
They're also PCI Express 4, not 5, which somebody raised as a question at the end of the session, and their response was, we're not even close to saturating PCIe 4.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Which is interesting, because like it seems like the CPU feeding the GPU is a big, like it seems like the CPU perf is the gate, not the GPU perf for once.
Yeah.
Let's see. They did a deep dive into how DLSS 3 works. I spent a lot of time testing DLSS 3 stuff because I think it's the most interesting part of this card, oddly. Because like, hey, the ray tracing stuff is fast enough to really crank up the ray tracing settings on existing games is a great place to start. But hey, all of your games will run at 2 times faster if the developers implement this new library is pretty cool. The way it works is by taking the lower res images and using motion vectors and depth maps to look for motion. Like now there's a different part of this whole thing that it's called an optical flow accelerator, and it looks at motion differences between frames to generate vectors to do in between frames. Like part of this works because the cards are really fast and they know what's coming before you can see what's coming, right? So it'll put a frame in between 2 frames that are slower. One is running slower than it needs to, and you get just a smoothed out frame rate. The DLSS 3 stuff only works on the 4000 series cards. But like I said, it does fall back gracefully on the older cards. So 2000 and 3000 series cards will get DLSS 2 perf on it. And they're trying to, the whole point of this, like Nvidia's quest to destroy micro-stutter continues with this.
I salute them. It is a bane.
I will say, from working on the Anacrusis, when we found stuff that was doing like lots of draw calls, when we changed the materials on the horde enemies and stuff like that, the actual average frame rate increase was basically nothing, but the perceived frame rate increase was enormous, even on like Xbox Series S and Xbox One and stuff like that.
I mean, it's like you were saying earlier, it's all about bringing up that 1% low.
Yeah. Because even if you as a player don't notice that that you're getting the stutters, you notice it in the smoothness of the motion when you're like moving your mouse across the scene and stuff like that.
It drives me nuts. Like it's way worse than just whatever. I mean, this is basically what we've already said, but like it's worse than just a consistently low frame rate to me. Yeah.
Now this requires reflex. So you have to implement reflex for this to work, because those frames skip the render queue. And reflex lets everything skip the render. Reflex basically works by working very closely with the CPU to make sure that the CPU is delivering new information to the GPU just in time for the frame to be rendered. So there's no buffer, which adds latency to the whole pipeline, and is one of the places that micro-stutter happens. So that's that. The other big thing, we touched on this a little bit, is the 8th gen NVENC encoder, which adds AV1 support, and the 40. Let's see, I think it's cards with greater than 12 gigs have 12 gigs or greater can do 2 AV1 streams at once.
Yeah, they've got an NVENC matrix on their site that has been around since the Turing cards that you can go look at, that tells you literally every card they have and like how many encodes, how many simultaneous encodes can this one do for a given codec.
It's pretty nifty.
Yeah.
I guess nobody implemented H.265 because it's encumbered by patents, right?
Yeah. If you listen to the VLC episode of the FossPod.
Oh, interesting.
You can hear Jean-Baptiste.
Is that at fosspod.content.town?
It is.
Wow.
You can talk. You hear him talk fairly bluntly about why nobody adopted H.265. I mean, so AV1 is more efficient than that codec. Also, on a technical level, it's not just a royalties situation, but it's largely a royalties situation.
So the AV1,
I'm so excited for fucking the world to move on.
I mean, look, my brain has filtered out H.264 artifacts for long enough. I'm ready to teach it some new artifacting.
Yeah.
The AV1 stuff is like the other bits and pieces we've talked about are, it's not widely supported yet.
Definitely not. But if you care at all about streaming, you want to buy hardware that can encode AV1 at this point.
Yeah, it's weird because like it means in a 2-piece stream setup, I'm going to be looking at another AV1 capable GPU, I guess.
Well, that's why it's so great that every card launching this year has it. Like you can go pick up a mid-range Intel Arc and get AV1 for a stream machine. That
is true. I'm trying to see. I think that the Premiere update might have landed the other night. The AI, the stuff that I was using for AV1 was early access, I believe, for DaVinci.
Also, to be clear, as far as I know, the ARC cards use the same encoding engine as QuickSync on the Intel CPUs, and I believe that is also coming. If Wikipedia is to be believed, the next generation of Intel CPUs, not Raptor that's coming out right now.
Okay.
But next year, Meteor Lake will have AV1 hardware encode and QuickSync.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I don't know where AMD is at with that stuff. I think AMD's hardware encoders have not been super well thought of.
The QuickSync quality is often not production level, is my understanding, at least in the old days. I don't know where it is now.
I think it's better.
Okay.
My impression is it's decent now.
Well, then there's also, that's kind of the hardware. Those are the big hardware beats. I mean, we can talk about number of cores, like the 4090, when you're looking at like shader cores, it's almost double what the 4080 cards are going to have when they're available. The ray tracing cores are almost double again. It's like 113 for the big 4080 and 191 for the 4090 and 320 tensor teraflops. Which is this is maybe, sorry, this is it's bonkers. It's a big chunky card.
Yeah.
The other stuff that they showed a bunch of other tech demos that I thought were kind of cool, like the modding tool. If we want to talk about that a little bit. I mean, I think you talked about it on Nextlander.
I was going to say, I feel like I've gushed about that a lot already. Yeah, the RTX Remix looks amazing, and I am very excited to see what people do with that.
It's not available yet, but it will work with all RTX cards, I believe.
I believe it goes into open beta next month.
Yeah. It has to be games with DX9 or DX8 fixed function pipelines.
Now, hang on. Does the editor work on all RTX cards? I know the output, like a modded game, an RTX Remix modded game will run on any ray tracing capable card, but I don't know if the editor does.
I think I'm going to look now, but you should explain what it is though first.
It is a compatibility layer for getting DirectX 8 and 9 games running with a modern renderer that supports ray tracing and a bunch of other stuff. There's a video you can go watch of this process, but it's the way that you hook into the game that seems so magical to me, because you literally run one of these old games and then run RTX Remix next to it and essentially kind of hit a capture button.
It grabs stuff from the pipeline, graphics pipeline.
Right. It basically peers into this rickety old rendering pipeline and sees what's going on and then inserts itself. There's a slide, I think, that's in that trailer that I'm talking about that basically shows like they're doing, I believe, kind of dynamic. I don't know if it's like code recompilation or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like these are games that were written for hardware that is 20 years old at this point.
It requires a Geforce RTX GPU to create RTX mods.
Oh, okay. So any RTX.
So any 2000 series card or newer will work.
Oh, that's great. They're using it's not that it's super relevant. They're using DXVK for this, which you might know from Proton and some other things.
That's interesting.
Like that's basically a DirectX to Vulkan translation layer. Part of how they're achieving that.
And the mods are playable on any hardware that can run Vulkan ray traced games. So that means it's not limited to Nvidia stuff. It'll also work on AMD and presumably Intel hardware as well.
And they basically made it sound like these mods will plug in to an old game just like any existing mod does. Like they essentially said like, hey, these will be hosted on Nexus mods just like the mods you're used to.
Yeah, and ModDB as well. It's the demos were really cool because like and the assets pipe out in USD format, so you can edit them in pretty much any, like you don't need the normal pipeline of 30 tools to do this to do the upresing. Like so I assume that means we'll see the Half-Life 2.
Yes, for sure.
Remaster sooner than it took. I mean, I guess the Black Mesa people just rolled straight over to that, right?
Well, watching them do it's in that trailer. You can go watch it. Like watching them do the modifications themselves, it seems like it's going to take a lot of work per scene.
Yeah, there were some questions. We didn't get to ask questions at the end of this, I don't think, because we had to roll to the next session. But I was curious if they demoed this with Morrowind, and I was curious if, say you replace the chair that's the chair in every fancy person's house in Morrowind. That's
in that demo. They show you can replace assets globally.
Oh, and it replaces globally? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
If you do the work on like a chair or a bowl or whatever, you can say, hey, replace this model across the entire game. But I'm talking more like bespoke light sources in a given scene have to be massaged quite a bit.
Well, but I wonder if when you replace one, if you can replace like light sources globally. So if it's the same fixture in every house,
probably.
If you can do that, there'll be performance issues that come with that, I bet.
There's like that paper lamp they showed in there where it's like, hey, we had to define a translucent paper material on this globe to make the light pass through. Like you could probably do that globally, I would assume.
Yeah.
I want to see Mass Effect.
Is Mass Effect fixed function, I guess,
all
right?
Three. That I don't know. All three Mass Effect games are DX9 on PC. I went and checked, but actually I don't know what their use of shaders is.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like they used shaders they used vertex shaders for a lot of stuff in that game, I think.
I forgot that it also had to be a fixed function game. That may be more limiting.
The thing is there's a lot of vertex shaders in Xbox 360 era hardware, but not a lot of pixel shaders. So I don't know. Like we might just not see grass. But anyway, it's like I think it's the most interesting. This is one of the more interesting demos that they've seen. They've apparently done a whole version of Portal 1 that'll be coming out soon. That is ray traced Portal 1 next month.
Yes.
I'm very excited to see what this looks like, because
I haven't played Portal in a very long time. This seems like a very good reason. It's short,
Yeah, it's like a one good session,
3 hours or something. This would be a great excuse to play Portal again.
I mean, look, do you ever need an excuse to play Portal again?
Got a lot of games to play. All right.
Fair. There's never more. I will say going back into Cyberpunk made me want to go back and play Cyberpunk for real this time.
Yeah, I never played it because it was such a mess at launch, and now I think I want to try to get one of these new cards before I play it.
It's pretty good. But anyway,
the only other thing I'll mention here before we wrap up is in this slide in our notes here. Apparently, no Founders Edition of the 12 gigabyte 4080.
That's interesting. I missed that.
It looks like they're only doing Founders Editions of the 16 gig. The 12 gig will only be AIB.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a weird choice.
A lot of weird choices.
I mean, there's here. Like I said, I would hesitate mightily before buying one of these cards if
the 90 in particular, you mean?
I would want to know what's going on with why did they launch 90s first and not launch 80s?
Well, especially because it's a month, like we can wait a month and see what happens next month with the 4080s.
Yeah. And it may be that like the 4080 is demonstrably slower, even with DLSS and all that. But I would not be surprised especially if you're playing raster games, if you're playing your Fortnites and your PUBGs and your Apex Legends and all that. Yeah. If you see roughly equivalent performance with DLSS on, especially once people start supporting DLSS 3.
Sure. Are you going to undervolt? I should undervolt.
The CPU or the GPU?
Well, all of the above, man. Somebody literally said it on our Discord a day or two ago. Undervolting is the new overclocking.
I do like quiet. I don't know. I'm about ready to build a new computer. I was trying to get the new computer together in order to benchmark this, and it for a multitude of reasons didn't work out. But we'll have something cool to talk about on that front soon.
AMD or Intel?
I haven't decided yet. I want to see what the 13th, what the Intel numbers look like next when the embargo lifts.
That's sensible. Hey, with all of these things, if you're not absolutely dying to upgrade or to own the fastest thing on the market, maybe wait. A lot of hardware coming out in the next 3-4 months.
Yep.
Before you commit to anything.
And also it seems like the supply chain stuff is a little bit easier, at least right now, because without the crypto pressure, it's getting a lot easier.
Yes. Thank God. I'm glad that's over.
Yeah. The other thing is I want to see when the DLSS 3 enabled stuff lands. Because like none of the games that I went and checked before we recorded this morning, I haven't seen patches that flip on DLSS 3 for any of the games that were listed.
I'm surprised.
I don't think Plague Tale is out yet.
No, it's out in the next week, I think. I'm surprised nothing was ready in time for launch.
But like Flight Sim, I don't think is updated yet. That was the one I couldn't find. Cyberpunk doesn't have any patch notes. It is non-optimal for these things to not like for this much of a marquee feature to not be supported on day one in any games.
Yeah.
So, but with that, it's time, Brad. Mm-hmm. And if people have questions about this, I have had some personal stuff this week, so my intent was to stream a lot this week with 4090s. I am going to pick that up. I think things are improving this week. So maybe this weekend and into next week, we'll do some 4090 streams. So if people want to see specific games, we can run them. I don't think I'm allowed to stream Plague Tale, but Cyberpunk is fair game, and I will stream that anytime people want. So if people want to see games, or if you have questions, send in the normal, either post in the Q's Seeking A's channel or email us at techpod@content.town, and we will answer them in the upcoming questions and answers episode.
Brad here from the future. That's my little breaking news sound for you there. Dropping a little fill in here that's recorded later because literal moments after we finished recording this episode, Nvidia put up a very, very short blog post entitled Unlaunching the 12 gigabyte 4080. I'm just going to read the entire thing here because it's extremely short. The RTX 4080 12 gigabyte is a fantastic graphics card, but it's not named right. Having two GPUs with the 4080 designation is confusing, so we're pressing the unlaunch button on the 4080 12 gigabyte. The RTX 4080 16 gigabyte is amazing and on track to delight gamers everywhere on November 16th. If the lines around the block and enthusiasm for the 4090 is any indication, the reception for the 4080 will be awesome. So there you have it. Despite all the stuff you just heard in this episode, there will actually only be one 4080 coming out in November on the 16th, which might be the first time they've mentioned that specific date, actually. It is the 16 gigabyte model, which is $1,200. The $900 4080 12 gigabyte, which is, as we said, a reduced GPU in terms of capabilities, will not be coming out in November. No other information about when it will be coming out or what it will be named or what it will be priced at. But wanted to make sure that late breaking information got into this episode. So there you go.
Brad, I think it's time that we thank our patrons.
Thank you, patrons.
Thank you, patrons. As always, Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod is a 100% listener supported show. If you would like to support the show with as little as $2 a month, you can join the fabulous Discord filled with beautiful nerds who talk about things like undervolting by going to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod and signing up there. As always, we would like to thank our executive producer tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, #Bunny Slimes, Reluctant Meme Participant Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, and James Kamek. And I think the gift swap is starting up soon. I got a message last night about, hey, can you make a channel for the gift swap? So we have a well-trafficked gift swap for the Tech Pod last year. So if you want to get some nerdy stuff from other delightful nerds, it's a good thing to get involved with. And I like that we started early enough that it's not like into the holiday crush.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Tech Pod.
True. The true statement.
Always there. See you all next week.